Sorry, Bill. Go ahead and start the video. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, guys.
Hey. Hey. What's wrong?
We don't know what's wrong with the robot.
This keeps happening and we don't know why. Are you sure you're using it correctly? It's not supposed to be doing this.
We've tried all these different things. We've been here all day and we still can't figure out what's wrong with the robot.
Okay, don't worry, guys. I'm going to call our mentor, Mr. David, and he's going to help us solve this problem.
Hello, my name is Caleb Dreisen from FTC Team Green Machine Reloaded, and I'm here to ask you a question. Do you want to be an engineering superhero?
And there goes Green Machine battling for the blocks in the backfield with the neutrinos. And Green Machine easily picking up those blocks, swinging that long arm over and depositing them into the bin in the back of the field. Continuing to do that. Wow, that Green Machine is a beautiful robot. Neutrinos with another 4 blocks for the Blue Lions.
First Stick Challenge is a program designed for students in grades 7 through 12 to compete head-to-head in a sports model. Teams are tasked with designing, building, and programming a robot using sound engineering principles.
The Engineering Superhero campaign was created by FTC Team 4318 Green Machine Reloaded. Teams don't always have the wide range of engineering talent on their mentoring staff necessary to tackle each issue that comes up during the building and programming of their robot. On occasion, we have had mechanical issues that our mentors could not help us troubleshoot. When this occurs, we consult with a mechanical engineer from the Applied Physics Lab to help us get moving forward again.
Other teams do not have access to this targeted type of assistance from knowledgeable engineers. We'd like to change that in order to help Maryland FTC teams take their game to the next level. This is achieved by building a database of engineers like you who can act as consulting mentors. This will be made available to Maryland FTC teams.
By becoming a consulting mentor, you are making a significant and positive impact without the need for a huge time commitment. Mentors do not need to spend every week with their team. Mentoring can be done with on-site visits or video calls or even just email.
People who join FTC as consulting mentors get the satisfaction of helping young engineers get unstuck and regain their can-do attitude. They are also able to work with and guide the dedicated and creative youth that make up FTC teams. If you're interested in learning more or would like to become a superhero yourself, please contact us at engsuperheroes@gmail.com.
Great video. Everyone, welcome tonight to the Chesapeake chapter. So our monthly dinner lecture tonight, we have the honor of having a special guest with us, besides the Green Machine, 4316. And please be sure to sign up if you are interested. Laurie Wiggins is CEO and founder of Sysenex. Her previous career has some really great programs, such as the Space Station Freedom, Sea Launch Vehicle, Next Gen Air Traffic Control System. She's going to speak to us tonight about moving risk management into the 21st century. And remind you to wait for a microphone if you have a question. We're going to hold questions to the end, or? Okay, so wait for a microphone. We are streaming live, and again, welcome, and thanks to our sponsors here at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. And Laurie, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. First, your comments and questions are welcome throughout the presentation, as well as afterwards. So, during my 27 years as a systems engineer, I have been a long-time observer of both the IT and aerospace industries and have seen many programs either outright fail or overrun. And frankly, this ticked me off. it wasn't just the money and the time that was wasted, that was bad enough. But the stress that people went through as they were dealing with these issues. Has anyone ever seen someone who aged on a program? Me too. So I started to think about this, and I started to do some more digging. There we go. So here are some examples of programs that have overrun. The GAO did a report in March of 2014 on 72 top DoD programs, and they found on average they were running 23 months behind schedule on average. So looking at problems like this, and of course it's not confined to the DoD, they just happen to spend a lot of money, so there's a lot of eyeballs in their direction. It crosses commercial and government programs, small, medium, and large. We have observed that on average, there's typically 60% rework on programs, very large. So I decided to dig into this and find out why this was going on. So let's first level set to make sure that we're talking about the same risk management process. So we borrowed MITRE's graphic because they have a nice graphic. But although there's some variations on the theme, the major steps are you identify your risks, then you decide which ones are important, you prioritize them, you decide their likelihood and probability of occurrence, as well as their consequence. Then you figure out what the mitigation steps are. Typically, you want to eliminate them or reduce them as much as possible. Then you track those steps to completion. Rinse and repeat as often as desired or required. Yes. I'll tell you what, I'll repeat your question. Okay, there you go.
The issue that we've found over the years is that what is the definition of risk versus issue? So can you give us your definition of risk?
Yes. For our purposes, a risk is something that's going to impact your cost, your schedule, or your performance. Potential problem that will impact one of those three. Yes, it is a future problem. It has not happened yet. Any other questions? Okay. My company, Sysenex, performed a risk management survey, and we asked our surveyees, these are folks that work in IT, aerospace, automotive, energy, and other domains, 24 questions about how they did risk management, why they did what they do. The question came up, okay, why do risk management? A show of hands, please. My management requires it. Customer or regulatory requirement. Okay. To save time and money. Good. Any other reasons? Okay. So our surveys said that 89% of the time their customer requires it. 2/3 of our surveys indicated that they were required by regulation. And so that kind of matches the number of hands I saw in this room. The question becomes, why does your customer and regulations require risk management? Many of you are familiar with this graph. It appears in Chapter 2 of the INCOSE System Engineering Handbook. The new copy has it in black and white. The old copy in color, so I kept color. But it's the same one. This is typically used as a justification for systems engineering. Why do you do systems engineering? However, the same logic applies to risk management. I'm going to get my wand. So, if you discover your risks, in other words, threats to your schedule, your budget, or your performance here, of course, it is much less expensive and time-consuming to fix it here than here. And if a problem is a $1,000 problem here, fixing it here becomes a $500,000 plus problem. So there is a big motivation to discover your risks early and to solve them early as you can, at least before they bite you. Any questions? Yes. Go ahead.
You got to really look at what we did in EMC over 50 years ago, design in, not design on, because when you look at risk in the different issues with performance and safety, once it goes too far down into the right part of the V into test, it gets much more expensive, particularly if you risk for test design.
Indeed. So you've seen that too in your program experience, as have I, and I think a number of others in this room. Another result from our survey was that 3/4 of the respondents already had a risk management process in place, and yet over half of them had a risk-related problem or failure. That's kind of discouraging. So here you've taken the trouble to put a risk management process in place, you've trained up your folks, and you have them use it, and still you're not getting very good results. So why is that? That's the question that I was asking, and this kind of matches the continuing trend towards more program failures and more overruns. One problem is the piecemeal approach to risk management. So what we're talking about here is the CFO has the financial risks, and the CTO has the technical risks, and the CEO has the enterprise risks, and the COO has the operational risks. So no one has the big picture, and if you don't have the big picture, it skews your decision making. A very good example of this is the Gulf oil spill. 11 people died. Over $50 billion have been paid out in damages, and there is no end in sight. We're 5 years out. The Deepwater Horizon blew up in 2010, and we're still understanding the totality of the environmental damage to the Gulf of Mexico. Last but not least, the 3 companies involved, that is Halliburton, Transocean, and BP, have suffered tremendous reputational damage, and that will last for many years. These 3 companies did their own risk assessment, and they cut corners based on that less than big picture. But pulling out from that, going back to the big view, obviously they took on too much risk, but nobody pushed the equals key. You got to push the equals key. Another problem with risk management as it's practiced today is the subjectivity of risk management. When you're sitting around a table trying to figure out what your risks are on your program, or when you're talking to your colleagues or your management or your stakeholders or your SMEs, whose risks make it onto the list? Who is sitting around the table but not talking? The risks in their head are not making it to your list, and therefore they are not going to be addressed. So, is it the person that has the loudest voice or the best personality? So, from the get-go, there are issues with how risks are identified. And then once they are identified, who decides what's the most important, what the likelihood and consequence of those items are, what's going to get addressed first, second, and third. So subjectivity is a big issue with risk management. Let's talk about risk identification. Of all the steps in risk management, risk identification is by far the most difficult. If you do not identify your risk, you can't address it. So it's very important then that you do that first step correctly. Unfortunately, in many cases, we find that it becomes a check the box exercise, and we'll see why here in a minute. Even as risk management becomes a bigger problem, there is more focus on it. The ISO organization came out with a new 9001, their quality standard this fall. There is an increased focus on risk, specifically risk-based thinking, to prevent undesirable outcomes such as non-performing products and services. Similarly, many risk standards exist. Many industry standards talk about risk. For example, CMMI, risk ID methods include conducting a risk assessment using a risk taxonomy. Risks associated with cost, schedule, and performance and other business objectives must be considered. IEEE Standard 16085, which I'm sure a number of you are familiar with. Risk ID methods include risk questionnaires, taxonomies, brainstorming, scenario analysis, lessons learned, and prototyping. Finally, risks not identified are implicitly accepted. So even though you don't know you have it, you still bought it. We've been doing risk identification the same way for a very long time. How many of you have sat around a table trying to figure out the risks on your program? Yeah. Per our survey, folks use a variety of methods to try to identify their risks. Over 83% use personal experience. No big surprise there. You get burned by something on a past program, and by God, you are not going to let that happen again. So a number of people also consult their SMEs and program personnel, over 70%. 2/3 brainstorm, like what we just saw in the picture. Over 50% use failure analyses, over 40% probabilistic risk assessments, especially if you're doing work for NASA. And those that consult their stakeholders, and even 50%. So we are talking about people that are intelligent, they are experienced, they know their business. And in the many discussions I have had with these folks, it is clear that they consider risk identification and risk management overall a non-winning game. They feel like they can't get to the finish line no matter what they do. They know they're missing things. They know it, but they have no way to get there. And this is very discouraging. So sometimes it becomes a check the box exercise. Okay, we've tried to do this. We've got our set of risks. Let's move on. So this becomes an ad hoc, non-comprehensive exercise. And the people that I've talked to, there is this unease surrounding risk identification because they know they haven't gotten everything. And they carry that with them through the program. Further, we did a study with George Mason University because we wanted to understand all the risk tools on the market today, commercially available tools. We identified over 50 of them, 50 tools. And not one of them, not a single one, helps with risk identification. So folks are on their own when it comes to identifying risks. It's whatever you can come up with or your team can come up with. The downside of undiscovered risks, not only the hits to your costs and schedule and to your performance, and if that involves safety and you've lost somebody, that makes it a very, very bad day indeed. There is the loss of reputation to yourself and to your team and to your company when things go wrong that you didn't know were there. Warren Buffett takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. Not only is there potential program failure, but job loss, yours and others. So, this is what I found when I dug into risk management and risk identification. And you might be happy to hear that the Debbie Downer portion of the presentation is over. Not a pretty picture, but there are better ways to do it. So once I had understood all this, I really wanted some sort of comprehensive approach to dealing with risk, something that was more objective, something that people could use on their own programs, something that people could use whether they had a big program, a medium program, a small program, whatever development approach you're using, waterfall, agile, component-based, it didn't matter. So I set about developing one. I started down that road, and I was giving an INCOSE webinar. This is back in 2012 on my approach, and finished the webinar, and about an hour later, I got a phone call from Dave Hall of Tony, Alabama. Dave was telling me that he had already done the analysis that I had undertaken. And we got to talking, we started collaborating. It turns out what he did was he looked at over 500 programs, their risks and their outcomes. And emerging from that was a common set of risks. These risks occurred over and over and over again on these programs. They were commercial programs, government programs across numerous domains. And although the face of these risks on a specific program changed, the underlying causes were the same. This is history. Why repeat the problems that somebody else has had on their program in the past? I know this is a very different way of looking at things, of approaching this subject. However, with these common risks, you can now use this, apply this to current programs so that you can identify the vulnerabilities on your program before they bite you. "218 risks in 6 areas were identified: technical, operational, organizational, managerial, external, and enterprise." So now these risks become a comprehensive approach because you're looking at all the areas of a program. The red dots that you see in technical are our friends around the table trying to figure out their risks. If you're a champ at this, maybe you get 30 risks. I mean, if you can get 30 risks, you get a gold star. You get 2 gold stars. We have 95 technical risks, the most of any of the 6 for technical. The blue circles are business risk. There's a whole industry that does business risk. Enterprise risk is another term for it. Lots of companies do it. Lots of consultancies help folks see their business risks and resolve them. And we cover those too. So here's some example risks from each of these areas. We'll just take one or two from each area. So if you look at technical, how about COTS, GOTS reuse? Doesn't exactly make the top of most people's risk lists. Reuse of hardware and software from another program, what a great idea. It's already designed, already developed, already tested. All you have to do is bring it in and slap it in. Well, not quite. So there are numerous risks associated with this. Two major ones have to do with making sure that you have characterized the behavior of this item that you're bringing in so that you do not introduce unknown or unwanted behaviors into your current product or service. Also, another one is successful integration of that item with your current product. For organizational, personnel motivation. For lots of reasons, if your personnel are not motivated, they will not put forward their best work. Is that a risk to your program? For operational, near-miss considerations. Studies have shown that catastrophes that occurred were often preceded by near misses. So some of the circumstances had come together to create a problem becoming a catastrophe. And if you have a system in place to identify those near misses, then you're much more likely to avoid the catastrophe. Another risk. For enterprise, let's take enterprise reputation. Can you say Volkswagen? They are relearning that lesson the very hard and expensive way. So when you are contemplating a new product, a new service, or a modification, do you know what that could potentially do to your company's reputation? Management. How about turnover rate? If you have high turnover rate on your program, you're a program in trouble because your brains are walking out the door. There's something desperately wrong with your program. Your program is at high risk. For external, let's take labor market. Have you ever tried to go out and hire someone with skills that you needed on your program only to find that you either couldn't get them, period, or you had to pay a fortune to get them? Can you say cybersecurity? There's a grave shortage of the folks that have that expertise right now, and they are commanding very large salaries. So these are just some of the things to think about when you are looking at a comprehensive set of risks. So if you're thinking about now, gee, this might work well in a tool, you would be right. I'd like to introduce Program Risk ID. It is a web-based tool. You use it to analyze your programs. We have introduced some of the features of the tool here. There's more. But the idea is now you have a standardized set of risks, you have a comprehensive approach, and you have a consistent, objective yardstick that you can go analyze one program or all the programs in your portfolio. Now you have a way of objectively comparing risk across programs. That has never existed before. Don't get bitten by your risks. This concludes my presentation. Let's open up the floor to questions.
Yeah. How does this risk ID compare to the Willoughby templates the Navy's been using for some time that seems to do similar things as they've gone back over their past programs and identified different categories and have the volumes of that?
What was the program?
The Willoughby templates, the Navy's Willoughby templates.
I'm not familiar with those. Does it look at all areas of a program?
Yeah, well, as far as being that their particular thing of Navy programs, yes.
Okay, so let me address that. In addition to simply saying, well, gee, have you thought about near-miss considerations? What the tool does is you really need to see where you're at in the solution space for a given risk. So we define 5 levels for each risk and NA, or non-applicable. So if you're at level 1 or level 2, you've performed the analysis, you have the process in place, you've done what it takes to be low risk for that item. If you're at level 5, say you either haven't thought about it or you have not addressed the risk. So when you are identifying your vulnerabilities, the user, someone knowledgeable about their program, goes through the 218 and makes choices about where they're at with each risk item. So now you can see where you're hanging out. We always say if you have a level 3, 4, or 5, you should go back and look at that. And based on your program priorities, now you can decide, okay, which ones do I need to address first, second, and third, and now you're playing with a full deck. Thank you for your question. Yes.
Hi. Question I had, my experience has been most people just really confuse the different aspects of risk, right? From consequence to what truly is the risk,
Yes.
which is uncertainty, you know, it's a potential thing can happen, et cetera. And years ago, I took a advanced risk seminar from a PMI, David Hilson, who's the risk doctor, been around for a while and wrote a lot of stuff with PMI, if you're familiar with his work.
Yeah.
And he wrote, which I thought was the best thing I ever saw, of how you clearly identify with given if then statements. You know, he calls it his meta language, you know, given this fact, if is the actual risk and the then is the consequence, right? So it kind of clearly delineates all that stuff. What do you have in your particular thing that clearly, because most people, you know, you ask them what the risk is, oh, schedule. Well, what does that mean? You know,
right.
What does it mean? So what is the stuff that you're doing and identifying? How do you clearly differentiate between given this fact, you know, the if then kind of thing? You didn't get into it here, but can you give us a synopsis of that?
Sure. Our tool focuses on risk identification solely. The reason for this is during that survey I told you about, it turns out that over 80% of the folks, the companies that we surveyed, already had one risk tool. Over 40% had more than one risk tool. So rather than create a tool that does all of risk management, making them purchase capability they already had, we focus strictly on risk identification. So once you do the analysis and you've addressed and you see the vulnerabilities that you have on your program, you can do the if-then statements because the then is specific to your program. Does that make sense?
So they actually write them themselves after you kind of point them to categories to consider, is what I looked at what you had up there, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I wanted to find out, you know, your slide 17. What about, you know, you're talking about your issues when you're going to the right of the V and, you know, from test to logistics maintenance upgrades. And when you look at the different subsystems where you're trying to improve something, don't you, you know, also look at fail by similarity, if they're not really testing the modification or the upgrade properly, you can, there's a big risk there operationally. And also, what about, risk when you're putting together a system where you're using COTS or MOTS? And, that was in one of the Wiley system engineering publications around '09, I believe. Well, there's been a number of things in that respect. So that's what, first statement I have to make. The other is environmental risk assessment, like hazard ID, dose response, exposure assessment, risk characterization, but that's more in the environmental, chemical, nuclear, not necessarily electromagnetic radiation, thermal effects. That's a little different. So what are you, saying about the COTS, MOTS issues, and have, they have to identify that when they don't test the modified equipment when they upgrade.
So is your question having to do with this tool being applicable to upgrades and modifications? Yeah. It most certainly is. Yes.
And you're looking at the different aspects, say system supportability, and if you're not making the grade on some of the tests, whether it's reliability, thermal, mechanical, EM, then there's an interaction, because if they're not making the requirements, by test, then there could be an issue, operationally.
Right. We have risks. I want to make sure I answer your question, and you've covered a lot of bases on that. But we do have risks that address those items that you mentioned. These are representative risks. I couldn't put all 218 up here. It'd be an eye chart. You couldn't see anything. But we definitely, this tool definitely addresses not only development, but modification and upgrades of products and services as well. Yeah.
Before we take the next question, I just want to show of hands if you do not have a blue ticket. We are going to be doing our book drawing. So just please raise your hand if you don't have a blue ticket. And Mark will come on over. Go ahead, Jim.
Do you have any war stories where you could say, if only they had looked at X risk, then this Y wouldn't have happened? Or if only they had used your tool, then this catastrophe wouldn't have happened?
We're a bleeding edge tool, and we're just getting those stories. But I have one personal one for sure. So I was working on a launch vehicle program. And the engineers and we were working with the payload accommodations, the shroud, and basically the top of the launch vehicle. I came on to the program, and it took me a few days to figure out that nobody had thought about how we were going to mate our part of the launch vehicle with the rest of the launch vehicle. And some of the designs were already 2 years in. And so I got to work on that. I was able to choose my area, and so I started working on that. And several $1 million later, and a very expensive, very elaborate piece of GSE later, we got it done. But that's a big oops with people that should have known better. Good question. Yes.
How do you apply the tool in different phases of the life cycle? Because in the conceptual phase, in some ways, you don't know where you are. You haven't got a solution yet. You're looking for a solution. And as you move forward, you're getting more and more specific about the solution and specific physical and software problems and other problems which we just talked about. So how do you apply it?
So the question is, how does the tool deal with being used in various aspects of the life cycle? So program risk ID is applicable at any point in the life cycle, including operations. But you realize more savings the earlier in the life cycle that you use it. You can use program risk ID in conceptual phase, and you're going to have holes. That's okay. It helps you identify those holes and the full range of holes so that you can decide which ones you need to go work off first, second, and third. The tool is designed to be used throughout the life cycle. So let's say you're able to use it early on. So you keep using it at intervals you determine, either to meet milestones for milestone reviews. If you're doing Agile, maybe for each increment. But the idea is that you keep using it, and the tool has a trending feature, so you can compare your scores from your previous analyses to what you have today. Program Risk ID's output is a score at the program level, at the risk area levels, technical, operational, and so forth, and each individual risk. And this enables you to see how your risk mitigation efforts are working or not. And when you have new risks come up during your product development or service development, because as your product or service development evolves, your risks evolve. The tool will tell you that as well. Does that answer your question? Okay.
So the question also, you have to think about, if you're working on a big DoD program, they're going to require you, especially on the ACAT-1 program, to do a DoD DAU risk matrix for all your milestones. And if you go back in time, all of your early risks are very organizational centric, because you're in the concept stage. You're worried about funding and management support and yada yada. But as you get further and further along, you start getting more technical and very specific about the solution.
Very intriguing tool as someone who parses things. It says it's on. Can you hear? Oh, okay. It's a very exciting looking tool, and I parse things within an inch of their life, and I get teased for that a lot. But the next thing that I look at is with 218 dimensions, is something that you have conceptualized, maybe even started work on, any kind of multivariate analysis of either past program failures or longitudinally going forward with clients, with adopters of the tool, to look at which dimensions you might find emerge from a principal component analysis from, depending on your scores, because now you'll have scores and data that's never existed.
Right,
exciting.
that's right, we do.
So you want to do like PCA or factor analysis and then find out, are there meaningful dimensions that would arise from finding where the biggest axes of variability tend to fall across these 218.
Quite so. So the question is, will you be doing additional analyses on the outcomes from these analyses, right? To see where maybe where the top pitfalls are for programs, to understand better what this data is going to be telling us, because you're right, this data has never existed before. We will be able to, we do plan on doing further analyses on the outcomes to understand exactly these kinds of questions. We have used this tool informally in our consulting, but you shouldn't believe what we tell you. You should believe what other users tell you, okay? So we already know it works. And now, as we gain more customers, we will get more results, and then we will start to report the kinds of results you're talking about. That's going to be really exciting. Yes?
Plans to go into the risk mitigation using the same methodology that you developed for the identification?
Great question. So, the risk levels provide sort of a guide to the low risk position for each one of these, all right? As I said before, the details vary per program. You're the expert on your specific program. Nobody knows more about your program than you do, including us. But we are providing this historical perspective, right? So I can see certainly in the future that we would expand either on the levels or provide a write-up for each one of the risks to help people in solution with that risk. Also, the 218 can be used as a taxonomy or risk framework, and future versions of the tool will enable folks to add their own specific program risks under each of these general risks, if you will. I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
One more question.
I wanted to mention, in all these areas, you're looking at the system engineering V from ConOps, mission, et cetera. And you mentioned, interface definition and control on your technical side. But how about the whole area and communications on a big program? Like if you have 2 divisions and 4 locations, the divisions are spread out, and how they communicate, because communications is a big area interlinking all these, disciplines.
Right. We do have risks associated with that. But what you bring up a very valid point. If you don't have free information flow, then you're in trouble. Yes.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Okay, we're going to get started with our book drawing.
Thank you.
Just one last call for a blue ticket. For you online, I'm sorry, but you'll have to go to Amazon and buy the book yourself. Okay, everybody has a blue ticket. The book tonight is Richard Branson, The Virgin Way. If it's not fun, it's not worth doing. So we need you, Laurie, please, to pick the ticket. Shake it up. No, there you go. No looking.